Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Longmoor House and to the Year of History, Heritage and Archaeology, and a Merry Christmas and welcome to the 12th of our 12 Year of History, Heritage and Archaeology Journey Through Scotland's Past lectures. So, as part of YIHA 2017, Historic Environment Scotland are presenting a series of lectures which tell the story of Scotland's past, from the deepest past through to the present day. The purpose of this series is to share and celebrate the wealth of knowledge within our organisation, and to give people a chance to learn about the archaeology and history of Scotland. So tonight's lecture is the last in our series, and our speaker this evening is Dr. Alex Hale, who will be talking about the application of archaeological thinking in the contemporary world. So Alex has worked in Scottish archaeology for 25 years. He studied for his PhD on marine crannogs at the University of Edinburgh and became an archaeologist with Arkhams and is now an archaeologist with Historic Environment Scotland in their survey and recording team. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alex.
Thanks, Kirsty. Hi, good evening. Thank you, and it's lovely to see you all here. Okay, leave your bags of archaeological knowledge behind. I'm going to introduce you to an exciting and new way of thinking about the archaeology of today. I'm going to talk about the impact that it is already having across Scotland. I'll give you a bit of background. I want to give you some examples, 3 in fact, and then quickly think about future opportunities. So, without further ado, that works. Hooray! The definition within the archaeological strategy for Scotland, which we'll hear about later, is brilliant. It's brilliantly clear. And it says that this is what archaeology is. What this means is that archaeology can be practiced across any time or any space. It's not delineated. So it has the breadth of 2.3 million years of human history and anywhere in the world and actually beyond as well. Archaeology, as you know, starts with theories and methods. And what I want to do is briefly introduce you to a couple of those, but taking a contemporary slant on them. So, what are the 3 fundamental foundation archaeological theories? Well, the first one is really typology. Typology is really useful because that's how we put things from the past into boxes. And it's really good recognizing when one thing comes before another. So, the telephone. Everybody knows the standing telephone and then the sitting down telephone at the desk. Everybody now knows the mobile telephone. So that is typology of the telephone. Another theory that we use is borrowed. Quite a lot of archaeological theories and practices are borrowed and adapted. Stratigraphy is a really good one. The oldest stuff is really low down. The modern stuff is on the top. Here you go, the stratigraphy of the iPhone. Started with the earliest one, the iPhone, then the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6, the 7, and so on. And it goes on. That's really good in enabling us to understand how old something is. Lastly, there is seriation, and this is when we try and put the typological groups into some kind of order to show things develop. And here you can see the development of the iPhone, and it goes on a bit actually, doesn't it? Oh, sorry. It goes on a bit this way now because we're up to the iPhone 10. Okay? That tells us about the development of material culture across time. So, that's really where we are at in terms of foundation of theory in archaeology. What about the practice? Well, let's think about how we define archaeology today as opposed to how we used to define it in the past. What is the archaeology of today? Well, it primarily thinks about the 20th and the 21st century. It is the archaeology of us and of our time. So it's about our living memory. and it's about what we can remember and the life we're living at the moment. But it's also about how we actually do archaeology. Should we be doing the archaeology of today the same way as we do the archaeology of the Neolithic, for example? Or is there actually an opportunity to change some of our theories and our methods and our practices? But why do we do this? Well, I don't know about you, but the world is pretty weird at the moment. Actually, the world has always been weird. And I think that's why archaeologists do archaeology, because they want to make sense of the world. They have their theories and their practices that try and make sense of the past. And the archaeology of the contemporary world is about making sense of the present or the near present. So it's really making the familiar unfamiliar. And this is something that happens across disciplines as well. And that's the nice thing about contemporary archaeology, is that it is crossing disciplines. So let's have a look at some of these things. Why is it archaeologists are doing it? Well, archaeologists have really good methods of looking at the world. We are really good at gathering data. We're pretty good at analysing it and interpreting it. And I think we're getting better, and this lecture series certainly shows that we're really good actually at presenting it. Well, some of us, not myself. But we're also really keen to try new approaches. We beg and we borrow and we steal a lot of our methods and our practices. And we enjoy doing it, and we enjoy developing them and using them and trying them on the past. So, let's have a look at why Historic Environment Scotland and its partners have been undertaking the archaeology of today in Scotland. And I hope it demonstrates why it is relevant to society, not only about thinking about what we do today in our weird world, but what might happen in the future as well. Okay, my first example. It needs no introduction, or does it? Faslane Peace Camp. Within the discipline of contemporary archaeology, there is an archaeology of protest. This is looking at how people have resisted things across time. It may have grown out of a little bit of anthropology in the United States, but it's being used across archaeology. Think about Greenham Common. There was a great protest camp there. Scotland has its own great protest camp at Faslane. It's been there since 1982, which makes it 35 years old. So it has a history. And it is part of Scotland's position in the global environment. So, what can archaeology bring to Faslane to understanding today? Archaeological investigation of Faslane could take on mapping the remains, the caravans, the buses, the signs, the communal areas. This is a place that has grown organically. It is a place that is a modern-day hunter-gatherer camp. It has people who are transient, who move through. It has others who stay for a long time. So can we use archaeological thought to consider it, to map it, to understand it, to engage with it, to then apply that further back in time to other transient places? Did you know there used to be two Faslane peace camps? One at the North Gate, one at the South Gate. The North Gate camp didn't last long, and they moved into the South Gate camp and stayed there. Archaeology can, of course, map where the North Gate camp was, but also it should map and these are maybe the intangible cultural heritage things. It could map the position of protest around the camp. There have been different places where people have chained themselves to fences. But the main thing that the archaeology of today can do at Faslane is work with the occupants. So it's not our job to write their heritage, to undertake their archaeology, but we can enable them and work with them to create and narrate their heritage. So that was my first example. My second one is a familiar one, I'm sure, to a lot of you, Dumbarton Rock. We all know Dumbarton Rock for its historical presence, this great volcanic plug coming out of the tidal waste in the Clyde. But did you know that Dumbarton Rock has another heritage? And that is the heritage of climbing. And that's why I've shown this archive picture to show this side, the northwest face of the rock, where the boulders are down here and the crags and the enormous sheet wall of rock climbing. And this has a heritage which is quite different from the one we know and love. The Accord project began in 2013, and we worked with climbers to explore their heritage of climbing and bouldering. And we did that with the community, the climbing community, which is a community of interest. And we worked using 3D data. The difference was we enabled the climbers to record their heritage, the rocks, the boulders, the climbs, and they then co-produced the data. We didn't take it away as experts, did stuff in dark labs with it and came back. We did it all together. It was a co-production. And they now have the data that they generated for them to use. And did you all know that this was one of the hardest climbing routes in Scotland, in the British Isles at one point as well? I knew nothing about this. So the Accord project gathered the climbers together, worked with the 3D technologies, printed out some 3D boulders, which is now a paperweight on my desk. But the point being is the climbers now have this 3D data, which they are now thinking about how they can create 3D climbing guides to promote their heritage, to then print 3D climbing walls from the actual boulder data that they have. That's all well and good, but what did it do? Well, with the climbers, we wrote an article that went into World Archaeology and has just been published, so that's quite a good output. That was a co-production. That was the climbers writing and the academics and the practitioners writing as well. So that worked well together. Somebody at a university department has decided to put that paper on their syllabus to demonstrate co-production. That's great. Really impressed with that. Thank you. But most importantly, and I think this is a real impact for Historic Environment Scotland, was we worked with the climbers to rewrite part of the statement of significance for Dumbarton Rock because of the cultural significance of the climbing. So that was great that they had an impact in that statement of significance. So the heritage now of the rock isn't all about the rock and the hard fabric, it's also about the actual holds and the climbs as well. That's my second excuse me, example. Third and final example is Polfail. You may or may not have heard about Polfail. It was a village built in the 1970s on the west coast of Scotland, on the west side of Cowal Peninsula. This is Portavadie in the background, the very nice marina down here. And this is where you get the wee ferry across to Tarbert, and this is Loch Fyne. And this is the village I'm talking about. Concrete village. It was built in the 1970s for the oil boom. The economic opportunities for Scottish industry had some strange decisions made at the time. Polfail was one of them. They were going to build in this big hole, they were going to build big oil concrete platforms and then float them out to sea and take them off to the oil fields. Problem was, it's on the west coast, most of the oil's on the east. There is oil on the west, we know this, but it's a long way out. The point being, Pol Fail was never occupied. It was kitted out, it had everything from pool tables to the linen on the beds. Nobody moved there. This could have housed 500 workers for this construction yard. Nobody went. So what happened to Pol Fail? Well, 30 years of ruin happened to Pol Fail, but something else happened as well. It went through a whole series of developers who were going to do things to it, but then in 2009, the owner at the time was approached by a collective of artists called Agents of Change, who are agents of change in the case of Pol Fail and other places. And they wanted a big canvas to paint on. They were graffiti artists. And they wanted to paint. And they got a chance to paint all over Pol Fail. So this is a creative response to a place. They chose different styles. They painted 80 pieces all across the village. The point being is how the creative intervention impacted on the significance of Pol Fail. And this is key because this really helps us understand the different styles so we could then track and work out who had painted where. That's the archaeologist coming back in me wanting to map it. So the change was begun by the artists, but it continued through social media, through urbex, urban explorers. They found out about the place. They began to get interested in it. And of course, there's the overall ruin porn that's currently going on about people taking photographs of old places as well. So that then raised people's interest in the place, and people wanted to go and visit it, and people did visit it. We visited it. We believed it wasn't worthy of a main survey for the building's fabric, but once the graffiti artists had moved in, they wanted us to map and record where they'd painted. So we worked with the Agents of Change. We had discussions with them about their artworks. We mapped the locations. We missed a few. We went back. We put a few more in. We found a few. So there's a mapping output. There's also an engagement output with artists as well. So what happened? Did it change the significance of the place? Yes and no. This is what happens to places where water gets through the fabric. It degrades. And eventually, late 2016, it was demolished as part of a redevelopment. They're going to build a brewery and a distillery and lots of homes. So it's gone. The fabric is gone. We have the record. The record has been produced. And occasionally it's still in the news again, as it was earlier this week, which is great. So that's Pol Fail, my final example. So just to wrap up, going towards an archaeology of Scotland's contemporary past, I hope those examples, brief as they were, demonstrate how we can approach the archaeology of today. I hope it demonstrated that through the nuclear arsenal on Cowal Peninsula and the sustained protest camp, we can enable others to narrate their heritage. Similarly, at Dumbarton Rock, we can think about different heritages that aren't necessarily fabric and buildings. They are landscapes of engagement. And of course, at Pol Fail, how the creative intervention has affected the significance of the place, even though it's now disappeared. And so, to finish, I hope this has illustrated that there is a changing role not only for archaeology in the contemporary world, but for archaeologists. How we do archaeology is changing. I hope it demonstrated that Scotland is at the cutting edge of this archaeological practice. It is happening here, and it's great, and we need to do more of it. And I hope that it showed us a little bit more about how archaeology can be applied to the weird world that is changing, is dynamic, and is actually always fluid. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Alex. That was fantastic. Slight change to our normal way of running things this evening in that we have a couple of other speakers, one of whom is going to be me. So I'm just going to very quickly introduce you to Dr. Rebecca Jones, who some of you who've been here earlier in the year might remember gave us our Age of Invasion lecture. But she's going to talk a little bit about, remind me, Becky.
Archaeology now.
Archaeology now.
Thank you. Kirsty and I are going to do a double act, and I'm going to do a bit of introduction about how archaeology works now, and Kirsty is going to introduce Scotland's archaeology strategy, which has been referred to already. Just when you think of archaeology, is this what you think of? This is sort of the fairly classic. This is Glasgow University's Field School in the Strathern Environs and Royal Forteviot, and I think most people think of excavation when they think of archaeology, and I think Alex has done a very good job in actually broadening minds and making us realise that it is more than just excavation. But do you necessarily think of this when you think of archaeology? Obviously we've got some excavation, we've got some coastal survey here, but actually we've got the radiocarbon dating laboratory at SUAC, the Scottish University's Environmental Research Centre here, and the process that it goes through. So there's a lot of detailed lab work that can go on with the assessment that we think of. And there are huge numbers of non-invasive techniques for archaeology. It doesn't have to just be about excavation. There's lots of types of recording. Alex has obviously highlighted quite a few this evening with regards to recording the contemporary past. But here we've got some examples of some underwater scanning. We've got a visit here for one of our designations teams. We've got laser scanning, aerial photography. A few of the lectures over the course of the 12 lectures we've had have made reference to crop marks, which are in essence the differential growth of crop over buried remains. And so you'd have seen a few of those, which we always just abbreviate to crop marks, recorded in essentially dry years, thanks to the differential, say, growth of the crops. But there's also other forms of survey, geophysical survey, and lots of other non-invasive recording techniques. But obviously archaeology has been going on for a very long time, and excavation indeed has been going on for a very long time. This is actually not one of the earliest ones, but this is 1950s in the excavations at Whithorn. Since the 1990s, archaeology has been a material consideration in the planning process. An MPP G5 was produced in 1994, which stated that archaeological deposits must be preserved in situ wherever possible, and if preservation is not possible, planning authorities may attach conditions to planning consent requiring the developer to fund measures to mitigate the impact of their development on the archaeological resource. And it's this developer-funded aspect that's actually seen a lot of the growth in archaeology in recent years, alongside obviously all the other forms of archaeology that go on in terms of research, universities and local communities getting engaged with their heritage. We've got the Scottish planning policy now. There is a review of planning in 2016, and there is a new Planning Scotland bill going through at the moment. There's an international context for all of this. What's known as, for shorthand, as the Valletta Treaty, which was signed by the United Kingdom in 1992 and ratified in 2000 and came into force in 2001, which actually aims to protect the European archaeological heritage as a source of European collective memory and as an instrument for historical and scientific study. And it's also a key part of that is this aspect around the conservation of archaeological heritage in the face of development projects and the idea that developer pays. More recently, we have the Faro Convention. It's not been signed by the UK as yet, but it is probably something that we're already putting into practice anyway, because it encourages us to think about objects and places and think about what's important to them and about the meanings that people associate to them. And I think Alex exemplified that approach and that ethos very well in his talk. And, you know, that the everyday and the ordinary is important and has merit alongside the special and the iconic. Historic Environment Scotland, as you know, was created in 2015, and we are guided by our corporate plan and our annual operating plan in terms of what we do. And we're a new organisation, and when we were created, or shortly after we were created, we needed to find a replacement for the Scottish Historic Environment Policy and created a new policy statement. We're now considering how we engage with that, and a project that started earlier this year, which is still ongoing, known as What's Your Heritage, is actually asking people what they see as important about their heritage. And the initial phase of consultation had 2,000 people in the first tranche of this year, which is actually really quite a significant figure when you consider that we're talking about the heritage. One of the other aspects that we do for archaeology within Historic Environment Scotland is we have an archaeology grants programme which invests £1.4 million per year in the archaeology of Scotland. Now, I thought I'd put some stats on. We all like doing these little stat slides these days. And this is just to provide you with some of the statistics. And this is the designations. These are the protected sites. In addition to what we have up on the screen here, is that we have over 300,000 sites recorded in local and national records. And these form the backbone for a lot of the planning generated work. And also it's that collective data, this combined with all these other records, that is used and underpins research and decision making around the historic environment. Now, in order to manage and protect, we need to know what we have. We need to understand the resource. And in recent years have seen the launch of the first archaeological research framework for Scotland. And unlike many other research frameworks that had been created in the past, it was an online resource and a wiki, allowing people to update it as new knowledge became available. It wasn't fossilised in a paper publication. And we're now at a stage where regional research frameworks are up and running, and that's the next stage for Scotland. This is the South East Scotland Archaeological Research Framework, which is happening at the moment. There's been one happening in Argyll, which is quite close to completion, and there are others in the planning stages. I also want to mention that alongside what Alex was talking about and thinking about the recording through oral histories and the intangible cultural heritage, that actually one of the things that's revolutionised the way we approach archaeology in recent years has been science and technology. The use of technology in survey and recording, in the online dissemination of information, and actually the scientific approaches, radiocarbon again, but also other forms of doing chronological dating, refining that precision, utilising Bayesian statistical analysis and all other techniques at our availability. And also things like stable isotope studies, which actually help us to do detailed analysis of skeletal remains and understand diet and mobility. And obviously there's things like facial reconstruction. This project here is a SUERC project, which is actually combining radiocarbon dating and dendrochronology dating to really try and get much more precision in how we date sites. I think as a sector, we're also getting much, much better at disseminating information and using different methods and approaches, accepting that there is an increased public appetite and interest, and there's been some wonderful television coverage and television and social media coverage in recent years. And this starts really quite early. This was Dig Art, a competition that was run as Dig It in 2015, and with sponsorship from the Forestry Commission. And this is one of the winners, and it's one of the ones I love. It was in the under 16 category in the Putting the Art in Archaeology. And the girl who wrote it, Darcy Axon, her comment was, I was inspired by a photograph taken of the stones with a beautiful sunset. The patterns are what I enjoy drawing at the moment, and I thought it suited the shape of the stones. Archaeology Scotland has the Heritage Hero Awards, which was launched earlier this year, and that's a way of engaging with the youth in terms of getting them interested in the heritage and interested in archaeology. Dig It has been running again this year to tie in with the Year of History, Heritage and Archaeology, and it's been a tremendous success in actually coordinating and using social media to disseminate to what can quite often be the hard-to-reach audiences of the young adults in particular. The Forestry Commission have been looking at aspects of combining sort of artistic approaches with actual modern laser scanning and producing things like this wonderful Broch image using laser scanning. Archaeology Scotland runs a very successful Adopt a Monument project, which local communities can engage and interact with their heritage in different ways. And I also wanted to mention that in 2015, Glasgow hosted the European Association of Archaeologists, which is the largest gathering of archaeologists really outside the World Archaeology Conference and in America, but they're actually a similar size. We had over 2,000 archaeologists descend on Glasgow for 5 days in September 2015, which is really quite a significant amount, as you can imagine, most from Europe, but it was quite a global thing. It was such a significant event that actually we created a new tartan for it, modelling today, which actually is it uses the colours of Glasgow University combined with purple to symbolise the heather of the hills, and it's called Ancient Gathering, which is a very apt name for a bunch of archaeologists. I wanted to finish, and I have an interactive bit coming up now, on World Heritage, which is obviously a global recognition of our heritage. Now, World Heritage sites are recognised beyond national boundaries. They're supposed to have, seen for their outstanding universal value to humanity. Now, there are over 1,000 of these sites worldwide. 31 are in the UK and its dependent territories, so there's one in Gibraltar and places like that. Now, there are 6 in Scotland. Now, this is now a question for you. Staff and board members are banned from answering this question. Who can name the 6 World Heritage sites in Scotland? Hands up and just one at a time. Just start calling up.
Edinburgh, Old Town.
Edinburgh, Old and New Town. Thank you very much. You've won a flag. Next one. Antonine Wall. Thank you.
The Rail Bridge.
The Forth Rail Bridge. Thank you. New Lanark. Well done. 2 more to go. St Kilda. Brilliant. But there's that.
Twice.
Well, twice, yes, but it only counts as one. Oh, I'm going to have to go back and get some more. We've missed one. Which one have we missed?
Orkney.
Thank you, Orkney, Skara Brae. Jane, I'll give you a flag. Because you've already got one. So it actually, in pictures, we've got the Forth Rail Bridge, Old and New Towns of Edinburgh, St Kilda, New Lanark, the heart of Neolithic Orkney, and the Antonine Wall, which is part of the Frontiers of the Roman Empire World Heritage Site. And with that, I will hand over to Kirsty.
Okay. Right, I need to take the...
You do.
Sorry, 5 seconds for the technology. Right. See, when I gave my lecture, it was before we had all this posh new technology in here, so hence why I'm struggling a little bit with it. But, here we go. Okay, hopefully that works. Yep, it's putting his thumb up at me. Okay, so we've heard quite a lot about the past over the course of the last 12 months, but what of the future? So what are we doing to investigate, conserve and raise awareness of the rich archaeological landscape that we've discussed over the past 12 months? Now, those of you who've been here regularly over the course of the lecture series might have seen copies of this sitting out in the cafe, which you're all more than welcome to take one home. This is Scotland's archaeology strategy, and about 50% of my day job goes into this lovely document. So we're fortunate enough to have an archaeology strategy in Scotland and an attached delivery plan, which sets out our vision and direction for the sector for the next 10 years. And this is our roadmap to a better future. So this is a strategy which is very much owned by the sector, and Historic Environment Scotland are one of the leading bodies on it, and we're pushing the whole thing forward, but it's by the sector for the sector. So everything that you've heard over the course of the last 12 months is very much in the spirit of the archaeology strategy, and the way that we do archaeology in Historic Environment Scotland, the way that we practice it and promote it, is all very much within the spirit of the strategy. So there we go. Right, so Scotland's archaeology strategy takes its lead from Our Place in Time, the Historic Environment strategy for Scotland, which came together in 2014, and is looking at the way in which archaeology contributes to the broader vision for the historic environment. The strategy also seeks to work with going further, the national strategy for Scotland's museums and galleries. So the ethos behind the strategy is to demonstrate the continued relevance and value of archaeology, ensuring the widest participation in our understanding of Scottish placemaking and identity, enriching and improving the quality of people's lives through archaeology. So the strategy is very much a means of improving communication and working together, discussing and addressing problems within the sector and pooling our resources to achieve shared aims. So the archaeological sector is facing significant challenges as it grows. As archaeology matures, it gains more responsibility for managing cultural resources. As it professionalises, it risks losing contact with its grassroots. As it discovers more, there's more to analyse and disseminate and more to store. And with this maturity also comes reflection. And the strategy enables a conversation as to where we wish the discipline to go. So what we're seeking to do is to create a more open and accessible archaeological sector with closer contact and collaboration between different areas of work, leading to higher quality research and broad global impact. So the archaeology strategy is being pushed forward by the Scottish Strategic Archaeology Committee, which was formed in 2013 following a review of the archaeology function in what was then historic Scotland. So the Scottish Strategic Archaeology Committee, or affectionately known as SAC, is an informal group representing key partners and interests to help with the development and delivery of Scotland's archaeology strategy. So the purpose of the committee is very much to promote the archaeology strategy, to develop a regularly updated implementation plan, to have oversight of delivery, and it discusses timescales, funding and priorities and areas to be addressed. So this is the current membership of the Strategic Archaeology Committee, so it includes the broad breadth of different areas of archaeology which currently exist in Scotland. Committee members typically serve about four-year terms? That's right, yeah. So of the strategy itself, there are 5 key aims, which I'll just quickly run through because, as I say, this is kind of a gallop through, which is what's quite an intricate and a long document. So through these aims, the sector seeks to support outcomes through the Scottish Government's National Performance Framework, including protecting and enhancing our built and natural environment and taking pride in a strong, fair and inclusive national identity. The wider vision for Scotland's historic environment, that it is understood, valued, cared for and protected and enjoyed and enhanced. And the vision for Scotland's museums and galleries to be ambitious, dynamic and sustainable enterprises. So these are the main lead bodies who are pushing forward each one of the aims, which I'll go through in a little bit more detail in a second. So of course there is ourselves, Historic Environment Scotland, leading on aim 1. The Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, who are a charitable body supporting and promoting the study and enjoyment of Scotland's past. And under aim 3 we have the National Museums of Scotland and Algeo. So Algeo is a forum representing archaeologists working in local authorities and national parks across the UK. And we have Archaeology Scotland, who are an independent charity working to inspire communities, amateurs and professionals to discover and explore Scotland's past. And last but not least, under aim 5, Innovation and Skills, we have CIFA, a professional body representing archaeologists in the UK and abroad. So, as I said, this is a very quick gallop, but the main aim of aim 1 of the archaeology strategy is to foster a culture of collaboration and ambition locally and nationally and internationally, and upgrade how projects are structured, funded and delivered, and this is the one that Historic Environment Scotland are chiefly responsible for. And aim 2, which is led by the Society of Antiquaries, aims to promote and support research, to make knowledge discoverable, accessible, referable and reusable. And into this aim comes the regional research frameworks, which Becky was speaking about just a few minutes ago. And under aim 3, we have encouraging sustainable management and protection, and ensuring access to data and advice, and ensuring the management of museums and archives support accessibility and research. So this is caring and protecting, as you'll see at the top there. And aim 4, which is led by Archaeology Scotland, so encouraging greater engagement and collaboration through archaeological activities, maximising the role of archaeology in learning, and increasing and improving the presentation of archaeological information. So this is all about archaeology and learning and education. And last but not least, we have aim 5, which is all about innovation and skills. And this aim seeks to develop and promote the supply of training and learning resources within archaeology, create more opportunities and demonstrate the importance of archaeological skills and to employers. And also under this is Scotland's kind of a push forward for a better focus on archaeological science within archaeology. And within Historic Environment Scotland, we've recently got our first archaeological science manager. If anybody was around for the Age of Iron lecture earlier this year, that was Dr. Lisa Brown, who's very kindly serving the drinks out in the foyer at the moment. She is our archaeological science manager, so she's part of this aim. And this is all about supporting innovation and development of scientific cutting-edge technologies. So I'd say it would be a bit of a gallop, but if anybody wants any more information, so we have a wonderful website here with lots of information on it, and also the delivery plan is up there as well, and an email address too. So this means I have to kind of thank myself, doesn't it? Okay. So do we want to do questions beforehand? Okay, because we've got a little bit of a vote of thanks to come at the end of this, but Alex, if you'd like to come up, and Becky. And I'll just detach the microphone somehow. Okay, right, does anybody have any questions for our speakers? Yep. You want this back, Kim? See, this is why I should never be allowed anywhere near technology. Here you go.
There's not really questions, but 3 observations, a couple for Alex and one for Becky. I can certainly attest that Dumbarton Rock had some of the hardest climbs of its time. My abiding memory is falling off the bloody thing. But secondly, a cross-cultural reference. There is a fictional version of Paul Fail in the first series of Yes, Minister, when it appears as a skeleton in the cupboard of Sir Humphrey Appleby. Yeah.
Because there is a skeleton in the cupboard of the real Paul Fail. Yeah. There was a Hansard question about the amount it cost, how it wasn't occupied and then very quickly sold on as well. Yeah. But we won't go into that. No. Yeah. But thank you for that. I must watch that. Thank you.
And finally for Becky, the importance of the World Heritage Sites to UNESCO was brought home to me 10 years or so ago. There was a big fire in the Grassmarket, and the morning after that the Secretary General of UNESCO rang me to ask what help we needed as a result of the fire, and at least I was able to say nothing important was lost.
Yes, yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, they do retain quite a bit of interest. I'm intrigued to hear you got that scale of response back. We do regularly send notifications to UNESCO when we need to, but generally we try and manage them as best we can. So, yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Yep.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Something that seemed to me missing from the strategy for archaeology. When the public flock to see an excavation, one of the first things that they're interested in is how is it going to be presented when the archaeologists have left. Very frequently it just goes back to being a grass field. But there's nothing in the archaeology strategy about that.
The archaeology strategy itself, it's very much a broad brush document. It's a vision for a way forward. So decisions on that scale would be made on probably more of a site-by-site basis. So there are certain ethoses which we'd encourage people to adopt as a result of the strategy, particularly under Aim 4, which is all about encouraging greater engagement and trying to take account of the different audiences who might be interested in an archaeological excavation. So some of the work that we've funded through our archaeology grants system quite recently over the course of the last 2 years years has looked at innovative ways of presenting archaeological information. So things like getting things up online, more open access publications so people can access things like excavation reports for free, and also 3D reconstructions of sites which go out via social media. So we try and lead by example, if you like, in this sort of thing. If we have people who are receiving grants from us, we'll encourage them in that direction to try and make the information that they're getting out of archaeological excavations more accessible. Essentially, we're trying to move away from a world where you have an excavation which goes on for, say, an academic excavation that's being carried out by a university that carries on for, say, 10 years, and then it takes a really long time to publish, and what you end up with at the end is a large monograph. And there is a place for large monographs. University library is very useful for students, but the vast majority of people never get to see the information which is inside them. So there are other ways of presenting that information. And although the academic route is very important, and a high level of research and important high impact research is important, I think we have to take account of the fact that the money that's being used, particularly through our grant system, is quite often public money. So I think that there should be a broader audience for these things, and I think we should really be looking at all the different ways in which we can present this information. So that might be a slightly long-winded way of answering your explanation, but the key point is that we are thinking about these things. Okay, any more questions? Oh, lots. Okay, lady at the back. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed this series enormously. And if I can offer a comment as a former bureaucrat, what strikes me about what you've just been telling us is that it addresses very effectively that ghastly political question, what for? You're going to be competing for resources, and obviously the sort of brutal box ticking goes on, but I think that the coherence of what you've set out is actually very useful in terms of demonstrating why this is useful and why it should continue. So well done.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Okay, I think we had one more question down at the front.
It was really who named the village McPhail? How could it succeed?
Polfail.
Polfail, sorry.
Yes, yes. That's the name of the previous settlement that is there, that is marked on the Ordnance Survey first edition map.
Well, if it failed once, it was going to fail again, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right. At that point, I'm going to pass over to Becky, who has a vote of thanks, because, as I said, this is our last of our 12 lectures this month, so I get to step away from the microphone for a minute.
Am I okay to use this microphone? Good, thank you. Well, thank you. I just wanted to really sort of finish off by saying that this has been very much a team effort from various bits of Historic Environment Scotland, particularly the Archaeology and World Heritage team who've led on it, but actually we've had a huge amount of help across the organisation. And to remind you, the reason why we've done these lectures was because of this year being 2017, the year of history, heritage and archaeology. And in fact, when the year was launched and they announced it, we actually had, it was quite wonderful being at the launch. They had they actually had twins. There were two with different bits of the Forth Bridge on there, but the photograph wasn't supplied like that. And of the 6 World Heritage Sites, and the World Heritage Sites in Scotland have played a major feature in this year, but there's been a huge amount of very exciting activities that have happened across. Now, this particular lecture series was the brainchild of Kirsty, so I want to make sure she gets enough credit. And just to say, actually, we believe it's the first time that Longmoor House has been opened up to public lectures in this way. So it's been quite a departure from us. And what we did is we've done a chronological series of lectures. I know there's quite a lot of faces I recognise from having been here multiple times. And we tied in, it's gone chronologically, but we've also tied it in with an initiative that was happening on the Canmore database by Maya Hoole, who actually gave our February lecture, which was looking at what's known as insights. And it's basically a detailed blog about some of the sites. Some of them are sort of the hidden gems, not necessarily the obvious sites, some of the more tucked away sites that you might not think to go and look at, with a few images and a bit of information just to help the sites to come alive. And there have been 2 going online a week. And I would encourage you to go and have a look at them. They're all still there and they will remain there and they'll be fully embedded in the Canmore database. That's the website to go to. But if you can't go onto the Historic Environment Scotland website and look for Canmore. These are the 12 lectures that we've done. We started off in the Stone Age and we came right up to the modern period. Over the course of these 12 lectures, I've been to all bar one, and I think they've been an absolutely fantastic series. I've learned an awful lot about the work that some of my colleagues do, and I think we've seen a lot of enthusiasm and expertise and passion. I wanted to particularly pay tribute to our first lecturers, Anne and Kirsty, because the idea for this series only came up in December of last year, and we asked them if they would give a lecture in January, so they had to be really quick off the mark, and we got 2 fabulous lectures then. Maya gave the February lecture, which was actually looking particularly about the work she's been doing at a skeleton known as Ava from the Ochavanek in the Highlands. Age of Iron, we had a triple act, our first triple act, which was Lisa Brown, who's already been mentioned, Archaeology Galore, talking about the rocket range. And then we had a double act from Rachel and Steve, which was actually looking at our interpretation side of things and how we've been dealing with changing perceptions on Clechymon and Shetland. I did the Age of Invasion, so I won't say anything about that, apart from the fact that I was the one which was the technology fail and the computer collapse 10 minutes into my talk. So less said about that, probably the better. John Borland's lecture the following month, I think for those of us who are there are never going to look at a picture stone in the same way again, and we're all peering for archers now. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, they're all online, so go and have a look at that one. We had a double act from Kirsty and Richard Wilander, looking at Christians and Vikings. Kirsty looking at the detailed sculpture material from Elgin Cathedral, and Richard on the really shiny stuff from the Galloway Hoard and the conservation work that we've been doing. Kings and Castles is the one that I missed, but I know that Piers and Roger both gave separate presentations on Roxburgh Castle. And then Laura talked about Mary, Queen of Scots. So that was a view of the archaeology and the heritage and the architecture of Scotland through an individual. We then had our brace of Kevins. We had 2 Kevins for clans and clearances. Kevin Munro talking about the last clan battle to be fought, and then Kevin Grant talking about St Kilda and South Uist in the 18th and 19th centuries. For Age of Industry, we had a wonderful discussion about the blacksmithing firm of Thomas Haddon, which is something I knew very little about beforehand, and I think we're all looking at gates in Dunfermline differently as a result of that one. And then we had a wonderful romp through industrial architecture of Scotland by Mark Watson, who took us abroad and back again. We then had Leisure and Pleasure, Judith talking about the way that people have visited sites in the past and the development of tourism in that sense. And then Mary Davis talking about 2 of the key lady antiquarians from the 19th century. Last month we had Alan and Philip talking about Age of War, Alan talking about the First and Second World War defences of the Clyde, and Philip talking about Scapa Flow. And I think having those lectures in November was also, I think inadvertently actually very, very good timing. And then obviously you've just had the 3 of us today. What I want to do is pay tribute to all our speakers. The youngest speaker that we had was in their 20s. The oldest was in their 60s. They were all enthusiastic, passionate, knowledgeable, which I think says an awful lot of really positive stuff about this organisation, that actually we've got that talent in the young, but we've got people who've been here for decades who still love it and still want to talk about what they do. And I want to pay tribute to that. We didn't have to twist very many arms. We did a call and we said to people, these are the subjects, these are the themes, please come forward. And people said, yeah, I'll do that one. And this is the geographic spread of what was covered. This was not engineered in any way, so I'm quite pleased to see that actually we had a reasonable geographic coverage. I gave myself a line because I talked about the Antonine Wall, so that's self-indulgent, but everyone else gave me grid references. But actually that's not a bad geographic spread for 12 lectures where we just said to people, talk about what you want. And then over the course of these 12 lectures, we've had 22 different speakers. And the other statistic I'm really delighted about is 11 of those speakers were male and 11 of those speakers were female. And we didn't engineer that either. 11 of the 12 were streamed live. We didn't for the first month, but we got it up up going on. And thank you all for coming, because over the course up until tonight, that was 379 attendees physically here for these lectures. So I want to thank you for coming. Obviously, the live streaming, I'd like to thank everybody at home who's been watching this. I'm sure lots of people have switched off now because there's a vote of thanks. I'm not showing them sexy archaeology. But I want to thank everybody for watching and for sharing. And obviously, these statistics are only going up, particularly the YouTube views and the Facebook views. But I think that's a really, really positive global reach. And I didn't print it out, but there's a lady in Canada who's watched quite a few of them, who I must give a shout out to. So thank you very much for watching. I can't remember her name. I wrote it down and I didn't print that page. But this is where people have been watching from. And that's just, we haven't done a detailed analysis of the statistics. I'm sure we'll find more from other countries, but these are the ones from the first set of statistics. And these are some of the comments that we've been getting, which I think we're really pleased to see this scale of feedback and the positive things that we've got. But we didn't just get that kind of feedback, we were getting questions as well. And I love this, how much would it cost to rent a house on St Kilda today in Feathers? I'm not sure Kevin answered that one. But I think it was, it just shows the scale, the extent to which people have been engaging. You've been engaging here, you've been asking questions, we've been continuing the conversations when we've been going next door. But also online, people at home have been engaging. And really that's part of the mainstreaming of the strategy that Kirsty was talking about, this getting archaeology out there and getting people interested in the subject. So I must finish with a vote of thanks. And these are all the people that have been supporting us once or twice, occasionally, but been there and helping make this all happen. But I wanted to give particular thanks to our regular supporters, the people who've been here several months on the trot, particularly Ali and Santi for all the work, and the rest of the communications team for all the work they've been doing with all the recording and the streaming live. But I had to finish that we couldn't do it without Kirsty, whose idea it was. So I want to finish with thanks to Kirsty. And then also, sorry, I was going to bring them in for this, but they'll just have to watch it on YouTube. Mike, Ros and Laura, who are all next door, who have done huge amounts. They've got the building ready, because this building, as I say, isn't usually open for public lectures. They've been making sure everything's there. They've been making sure everyone's been using the right template, that we've got all our copyright attributions the same. They've been...
Stacey from Winnipeg.
Stacey from Winnipeg. Hello, thank you, well done. That was the one. Did that come from Mike next door? Or right, thank you. I think, oh, they are watching. Right, okay, can we thank them because they're watching us next door? And really, and if you could just do a final, one final round of applause for absolutely everybody who's helped, just not the names on these slides. And then I'm going to hand over to our chair, Jane Ryder, who just wants to give some closing remarks.
Yes, closing remarks. Not extensive at all, but I just wanted to say how much I have enjoyed this series. What a good initiative. I think it's been all credit to Kirsty and to Becky for running this. I've been exercising chair's privilege, you understand. And so, in fact, just before this lecture, Becky and our senior archaeologist Richard and I were discussing a site which is being excavated in one of the islands of Orkney. And precisely that question you asked about what do we do now, having excavated it for several seasons, but some interesting ideas and picking up on what Kirsty was saying about how do we present, and it begins to get into Alex territory about intangible cultural heritage. So some fascinating ideas. I say purely personal, chair's indulgence, but I hope it's been of interest to you as well. And to just say thank you all very much, congratulations to the team, and you've set quite a precedent and quite a high bar for other members of staff. It's been a great joy to have so many members of staff who perhaps don't ordinarily have a public platform to be able to demonstrate the wealth of talent that we have. but there's much more sitting in the organisation. So I'm looking forward to finding it and to displaying it to you over the coming years. So thank you very much. And I think we invite people next door to join us for a glass of wine. Please do. Thank you.